Welcome to Make Your Money Matter. I'm Brad Barrett. Hey, today on the show, we're going to talk about illusion and perception. I'm going to present you today with an image that many of you have probably seen before. I want to ask you the question, what do you see? Now, the image itself won't change, but what happens is your perception changes. We're going to talk about that as it relates to how we view the economy and how you typically view your money and your investments, especially in a year like this where it's an election year. But before we get started, make sure to smash the subscribe button, hit the notification bell so you don't miss a single episode. All right, let's get into it. So we're gonna throw this image up on the screen for you. And when we do, I want you to declare right away, right when you see it, okay, what you see. All right, 3, 2, 1. I'll give you a second. Okay, by now, you either see a duck or a rabbit. Now, over the last century plus, the duck-rabbit illusion I'm showing you has actually appeared in a bunch of magazines and a bunch of books. And it was actually included in Ludwig Wittgenstein's Philosophical Investigations, which I actually found interesting because the famed philosopher at that time actually used the image to show the difference between, again, perception and interpretation. Now, here's my bridge I want to make for today. So, for example, in this image, if you see a duck and you declare it's a duck, Brad, but once you've shown that it could also be a rabbit, you declare it and still see it as a duck. See, what the nuance there is, and studies have actually shown that depending on which animal you see may actually have a lot to do with your sociological or psychological factors. Now, for example, let's say when this image is shown to people on or around like March, April, like Easter time, they're far more likely subliminally to see a rabbit because everyone's thinking on their mind subconsciously, Easter bunny. Now, in many ways, how we perceive and interpret the iconic illusion and the sociological and psychological factors that play into that really mirrors how we perceive or interpret the economy. And depending on a number of factors like the time of year, geography, personal employment status, consumed media, and so on and so forth, I mean, I can go on a whole tirade there, we can see the same thing in two different ways, but both can be right. So those who see, for example, watching and listening here, a promising 2024 global economy, let's say we'll call it a rabbit, will point to, let's say, the latest monthly inflation data, things like CPI, the Consumer Price Index, which showed a 0.1% increase for the month of November, which, by the way, as this recording was the last data set for that. But you can also extrapolate that over 12 months, and the annual rate is approximately 1.2, which is well below the Fed goal of 2%, something we spoke about recently. Now, conversely, for those who see, for example, a struggling economy, say a duck, we'll call it that, we'll note that if you exclude food and energy from the latest CPI numbers, you actually get a 0.3% increase for the month of November, and that's annualized to 3.6%, which is well above the Fed's goal. So again, nerdy example, but to see a rabbit, just look at the latest data showing job growth continuing at a healthy pace, and we're gonna, conjecture here on these bridges I'm trying to make between this illusion and this perception versus, what we're seeing in terms of numbers and data sets from the actual economy. So like the unemployment rate, if you look at it this way, remains incredibly low, especially in historical terms, at 3.7%. The duck, by the way, will come into focus if you zero in more closely on employment because most of those jobs are in the service sectors or increased government hiring, while jobs manufacturing are actually coming along at a much slower pace. Now I can go on this in terms of data sets, and I want to bore you with different economic indicators, but here's where we're viewing the rabbit duck illusion and the economy do differ. There is a difference here. So now with the image, if you think about it, it's impossible to see both animals at the same time. And we've been talking about it. Now think about it. You can't do it. The perception of one voids the perception of the other. But that's not the case with the economy. Like if we wanted to, and we do, we're able to take in the full picture, call it a rabduck, if you want to call it, of the economy. By the way, there is such a thing, a turducken, so why not? But I digress. And here's what I want to try to get across here. This is us here, One Capital, and I want to share this through this show today, is inflation is on the decline and well off the peak of 9% that we saw in June of 2022. It's also stubbornly still above the 2% goal set by the central banks. And I would also say most economists expect it to stay above 3% for the remainder of 2024. And the labor market, we talked about that. That isn't a good place, even though the Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell believes wage growth must cool in order to show inflation is truly under control. But smart investing requires absorbing the entirety of the economic picture. But this allows us to know when and how to diversify, how to manage risk, how to look toward the horizon, not just, the viewable stretch ahead. I mean, economies, are extremely complex entities. Anyone who tells you otherwise or trying to oversimplify it is just crazy. But seeing it from all angles and viewpoints gives us perspective on what we do, for example, as money managers with our clients' investments. So current economic reality creates opportunity as markets react or overreact, as they tend to do. But remember, investors are not buying last year's profits, nor should you. Okay, good money managers are not looking and buying on last year's profits. They're buying next year's expected profits. One final point, I want to put this in perspective here. Take a look at the image below. So here's two rabbit duck illusions next to one another. Now, when asked, most people, not surprisingly, see either two rabbits or two ducks sitting side by side. And you can see this as I'm talking, but when given the cue, duck eats rabbit, if I said that to you, right, the brain is given the context, the perception it needs to distinguish two identical image. By the way, the study, according to the University of Alberta neuroscientist Kyle Matheson, demonstrates that we can control the brain's way of interpreting information with just a few words or with an image. So why am I bringing this up? We should all be mindful of that when we're reading news. Okay? We're often interpreting and understanding information the way we want to see it for ourselves. This is useful advice. I think to kick off this new year, and just going off what this neuroscientist statement says, is that we're often interpreting and understanding information the way we want to see it. And we don't realize we're doing it, but that's how it's happening. And ask yourself, what are you letting in and what are you wanting the outcome to be as it relates to how you see the economy, which ultimately rolls back into how you see the world and really how you see your money and what you're going to be doing with it. Because yes, there is a very, very big connection point between your emotional needs or wants, I should say, and your rational needs and wants. And when it comes to your money, you have to make sure those are in check. And the way you can do that is making sure you have a good, solid counsel with you to work through things on this, to have a second opinion, to give you some advice with maybe some different perspectives or experiences, right? So you can make sure that the context, the lens, if you will, that you're looking at is the right one when it relates to making sure you're building wealth, protecting your assets, and growing your investments. I've shared this before. I want to say it again. One of the best analogies I've heard in a long time was, it's not the water around a boat that sinks a ship, it's the water that gets in. Be mindful of what you're letting in and why. Hey, I hope you enjoyed that today. If you did, make sure you subscribe to our show so you don't miss a single episode. And we're going to post this image as well on our social media platforms. So if you're not already doing so, make sure to follow us at Make Your Money Matter on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn, and leave us a comment. Tell us what you saw first. But until next week, always remember to make your money matter.